The basis of all land development calculations
is land surveying. We can move the entire land development industry forward, but we have to fix the problems of land surveying first. Before computerization, land surveying hadn't changed for a century. 50 years ago, MIT changed the face of technology for land surveying with a new form of coordinate geometry. That set the stage. Hewlett-Packard was a leader in instrumentation, began the digital age of field equipment. Their HP 9815A in 1976 could store point numbers, which greatly sped up the office calculation. In 1969, Jack Dangerman found ESRI, the leader in GIS software today. 1975, I began developing surveying applications, and quite a few other companies were formed the same year. 1978, I was a retail purchaser of the first HP 41C calculator at Neiman Marcus in Dallas. That same year, Charlie Trimble, who worked for Hewlett-Packard, purchased the rights to what we know today as GPS. We introduced our first software package in 1980. I sold 20 tapes to local surveyors in Dallas at $2,000 apiece. Hewlett-Packard introduces affordable for the time large-scale plotting. And that was the same year Hewlett-Packard called us to collaborate after selling its division to Wild Instruments. Our 1981 HP 87 site computation package was introduced for only $895. And then we formed Land Innovation in 1982 and moved to Minnesota. Until 1984, all software for surveying created their own drafting. So the milestones were point number based coordinate geometry replaced manual coordinate entry. Every vendor had their own drafting directly from the coordinate geometry. Thus the drawing and the coordinate geometry maintained the same accuracy. Electronic distance meters and other field equipment created the birth of data collectors. There was no common file format. In 1983, a typical system with hardware, software, and the plotter at today's dollars would be $80,000 for one system. So then in 1982, AutoCAD came out. It wasn't until '84 that it became a significant player in the industry. Most software firms did not pull on to the AutoCAD bandwagon. A few new players like DCA and Carlson, who is still around today, and others built their applications on Autodesk or AutoCAD products. And then over the next 5 years, architects started demanding AutoCAD format. So most of the surveying firms that we were familiar with and civil engineering firms would simply copy from a friend an AutoCAD. So they proliferated tens of thousands of copies, and how much of that was actually bought was questionable. And then in 1988, the Software Alliance, or as we know it, the Software Police, was formed, and illegal copies of CAD carried a huge fine. Overnight, Autodesk became a massive and profitable company. The geographic information systems we know today, as we get online to the city's computers and find out all kinds of information, that really came into play in the late 80s. Ultimap was the technical leader and would have changed the face of how GIS systems work today, but their marketing was terrible, and ultimately they failed even though they had the best product. In 1994, we took a chance and we jumped on the Unix bandwagon. Unix allowed us multitasking before Windows was able to accomplish it. Also, throughout the 80s, every different instrument company had their own software, their own hardware, their own data structures, and eventually by the end of that decade, tripod data systems, or the TDS format, became the standard. 1996 was a banner year because that's when AutoCAD acquired DCA, which was known as Sofdesk. Now, here's the problem. When AutoCAD did that, and by the 1996, virtually all of our competition abandoned their own drafting and used AutoCAD for drafts. So now AutoCAD essentially was competing against everyone that invested in their product for the drafting. 1990s, mid-1990s, was ESRI started getting market share over the competitors. They did that by convincing cities they could quickly trace in their map, and then convince them that if they went in GPS or section corners, they could stretch a rubber sheet all that bad data, and somehow magically it would be fine. In 1987, we formed Rick Harrison Site Design. Planning was getting dumbed down because of automation. In other words, instead of actually sitting at a board and thinking about the design, you could sweep your mouse or you can enter in data very fast, and you can get a 100-lot subdivision out in a matter of just several minutes. But it wasn't a nice subdivision, and unfortunately they were getting built and the face of the country was changing in a very, very bad way. So we formed the research firm to discover how we can create technologies to design better, not just fast. So the milestones where TDS formats won the war. AutoCAD introduces their own civil solution. Not a really good thing for all those other vendors that invested in them, and eventually almost all of them went out of business. The Unix gave us some new life with their Windows and their multitasking. We were very profitable. And ESRI creates a polygon-based mapping. No curves were created. Unix systems we were on in 1994 are actually still competitive today, so things started to come down in price and performance skyrocketed. So now we look at the regression of the land surveying industry. A good thing, it's in green, SketchUp was introduced in 2000. In 2004, AOL purchased MapQuest. It was the first time the public could just see their site by clicking onto a MapQuest map. And then it was the public's perception you no longer needed a land survey because it's right there. Or you could get the data off your GIS map, and it's right there. And that data was probably traced off of an aerial map, which is accurate to 5 foot horizontal and half a foot vertical. LiDAR, which is a military radar from a plane that picks up a point like every 2 feet, and it sprays a topography with millions of points, getting what is supposedly accurate data. The excess data eventually suffocates the industry. In 2005, after our non-compete was up, we started working on a new generation core technology to solve the problems that have persisted and actually gotten worse. And you cannot solve any problem without elevating the land surveying profession first. In 2014, drones become the race. The danger is, again, the public might think, hey, I don't need a surveyor. I'll just buy a drone for $1,200 and I'll get a topography, and I could probably get the boundary off of that. Again, nothing could be further than the truth. The Oculus Rift. We were the first in the world to get projects approved at public meetings using the Oculus Rift. The milestones, public assumes most architects, students, and planners can easily access the data to replace the land surveyor. Point number geometry from the mid-70s burdens production. It's the Achilles heel. Software continues to be incredibly complex and cumbersome, and there's still commands. Imagine if you had your iPhone, but you couldn't just press a button. You actually had to type in up to 2,000 commands. You wouldn't use your iPhone. Data overload. You'll see that. Polygon-based maps and LiDAR. It's ridiculous. Deliveries look exactly the same as, I'd not say 1960s, I'd say 1916, with very little useful information. There are significant problems that we face that can't be solved by just continuing what we've been doing. The first problem, point number management. When point numbers came out, there was no data collectors. Surveyors were lucky if they could collect 30 or 40 points a day. Today, a surveyor can go out and do 2,000 points in a day. The typical office manages everything by point number. This slows everything down. It's cumbersome. You don't need it. Now we're going to start at 1900. You can see not much has changed. But during the automation times, during the times we've had this tremendous growth, look at the plats. They don't change. They're just as if someone hand drew it with the same information, the same level of confusion as a plan out in 1900. People don't understand what this plan represents and how it's going to look like when it's built. You can't run the numbers. What's the impervious surface? Where's the pave? I mean, it's black and white. Who doesn't possess a color printer or plotter today? And then there's CAD-based drafting. There's coordinate geometry mistakes because the geometry is not part of the drawing. There's a hook for every corner that goes to a block of information, and this is so disconnected. No wonder there's tons of CAD-based lawsuits. And that's the norm, being sued. You put corner circles on a CAD drawing, it changes the length of the lines, and those lines can't be used obtaining area. You have to go to each one of those points and create a polyline around it to contain areas. You're not going to get the exact impervious surfaces of driveways and sidewalks and all the busy things that go on a finished site plan. That's going to be guesswork. The area isn't saved in a way that could be used for intelligence. Thus, CAD cannot be used for GIS, and the reason GIS even exists. So geographic information systems were created so you could see a map and it could be tied to all those volumes of data that's in the city records. That's what it's for. But they're also done by the lowest bidder with vague information to work with. So when it was first introduced, computers were incredibly slow. The only way you could get a curve to draw was a bunch of little straight lines. That's why they did that. That was fine in 1970. It's not fine in 2017. Not today. So how many points do you think it takes to draw these 9 lots in Pontiac, Michigan? It took 670 individual tiny little lines to draw those curves. 670 points. There is 160,000 points to draw that small little area. And every single one of those points is off. This is a fairly accurate aerial map. Now keep in mind, aerial maps are only guaranteed to be accurate 5 foot horizontally. I'm going to overlay in our software the GIS data, and it's off as much as 40 feet. 20 years ago, if I showed someone a contour map like this, they would throw it back in my face. And yet this is supposed to be acceptable today. There's the center of a street, can you tell? And there's your curb lines. In fact, you can't even see a curb line. In the old days, you'd actually see top of curb, bottom of curb. And yet it overloads the data with excessive amounts of information. 100,000 points almost just to draw this. Now what happens is it overloads a computer. Computer can't do anything with that, so someone has to take literally a day, maybe 2 days, to edit all this stuff up to be usable. That's not progress. That's going behind the curb. This is a 40-acre site. It's already been filtered by a software, and yet it contains nearly 1 million points. That's a problem. The other problem is CAD is a jack of all trades. It's a master of none of them. And land surveying and civil engineering is such a small piece of their pie, and their major market is not going to be land surveying, and it's not going to be civil engineering. The more complex and the less integrated, even it has the same name on it, and the more options, the more confusing. So we had to take and reinvent. We had to sit back. We have the power today of the computers to do some amazing things that were not possible before. Point number management. Today, when you see the information you got, what good are point numbers? You have to manage it. They have to separate the point numbers for the curb lines, separate it for the buildings. That's a lot of time. To get rid of the point numbers, we had to go to a new form of coordinate geometry using position in space. And the way that works is when you call in field work, and this is the user interface, and see all those point numbers and elevations, can't make heads or tails of them. This is field work. I isolate the iron rod. I'm actually going about 200%, twice as fast as in normal work, just for time. I'm changing the character size for my annotation, which you can't do in CAD, by the way. Every screen refresh, that's a recalculation of those bearings and distances. It's just tagged with the intelligence and a line. So the annotation takes no memory. Corner circles, they're the same distances because we're not changing the length of the line. You can't do that in CAD. It's impossible. Now I'm doing the center of the creek, and I'm just connecting those lines. Again, you're looking at double speed. I've connected my different items. I'm doing the driveway. And now what I'm going to do, you'll notice the user interface is very easy to view. It's almost iPhone-like. In fact, the icons we created before, in the years before the iPhone was even introduced. So you might say we were the first ones. And now we've got the boundary of the line work, and I didn't enter a point number. There are no point numbers there. We do have to have false point numbers. It goes back to a data collector. It'll work. But eventually we could get rid of point numbers in the industry. Contour lines don't exist. You can call them at any interval, anytime you want. You can query the land for slopes, things like that. And the way you create the topography is just take, and I'm showing all the points. I want to get rid of the boundary, so I'm going to make it inactive. otherwise it will follow the boundary. And then I just create a topography. Red is low, green is high. That's it. And then I'll activate all the layers. And then I've got the topography. I can show at any interval, anytime I want. Look around you. Look around your room. Do you see any lines and curves? I bet you don't. What's important isn't the lines and curves. It's what the lines and curves represent. Is it lots? Is it the building? Is it the rooms in the building? The window locations? Now we have a new era of information. And all of that data is tied. If it's pervious, impervious, you could put cost on it. You could bury information on that, which means we could go into a precision GIS in the near future. So the way this works, I just extended those two lines into the building corner, and I'm going to go to geometry, and I'm going to split that one line. Now it's 3 different lines, so it stops. It's forming a shape. So I'm going to change creek to a house, and then I'm going to call it a single-family house. More descriptive. I'm going to paint it with a color from the virtual reality settings in yellow. I'm going to give it a height of 20 feet, so it's massing when it shows it. And I'm going to paint that surface now as house just by pointing in it. I'm going to paint the driveway by pointing in it. I've painted the pond already, and I'm going to close off my road so that it's a road, and I'm just going to go paint that with pavement. It's already got a more descriptive name, and I'm going to paint the site. And every time I do that, you see the area in the upper right corner. Then I can report and point to anything, and it will give me the area. I'll get a legal description of the site. There's your legal. So now take and get a 3D of the site, and I want the contour lines visible. Now I'm in 3D. I'm in video gaming. I could actually use an Xbox 360 controller. There's my house. So this is a simple massing. But now I want to take a look at the trees. So I'm going to just go to oak tree, and the points that show in red are my oak trees. And now I'm going to pull in a model. Now you're looking at actual time. So these last demonstrations were actual time. The black splotch is a 3D model, typically from SketchUp, and then I'll get another 3D view. So now I've got the trees in SketchUp. And now what I could do is start using the communication and go to the surveyors to verify in the field, hey, does this really what it looks like? Here's the contours, and here's the shadows. I can then advance the time or pull the time back, and those shadows will be accurate. Surfaces are defined directly from the precision coordinate geometry, which is defined from the drawing. There is no inaccurate data here. It's all geometry. Then we could go to define it for its environmental impact. Now, numbers are dangerous because, like planning commission members, they'll look at it and go, oh, geez, look at all those big numbers, 37.42% of the impervious area. So instead, there's a more understandable way to communicate. This is the same data. Hey, look at all that green space. Look at all the green. Get your plan approved. Look at the driveways. Look at everything is just data that you can easily access, which you can't do in CAD. That's impossible. Look at the shadows on the building. That's using the surfaces. We're just shadowing the house. The legal description. It's all there. I gave height to the buildings, height to the walls. And then we look at it in 3D. You can see the buildings. And then we use SketchUp cars and people and furniture. And it's easy to learn with a free virtual viewer. So you're actually giving the public, the clients, this information that they could go through like a video game. And it becomes a lot more communicative. It's a new era. And it only takes a few minutes extra. You could go in the buildings. You can see what the views are. It's not any guesswork. As you're reading a shapefile, we look at every line that comes in. Is it along a curve? We'll reduce those 30 or 40 or 50 points per curve per lot into an actual curve, if it actually is circular. LiDAR. So this is corrected. It's 1.1% of the original data. It's the exact same information. 1%. We can now see mathematically where the low ground is, where the high ground is. We don't have to look at numbers. And then I added a site plan. When you look at the detail in the site plan, the windows, the walls, everything, all of this data, we're still only 20,000 points. We're 2% total to get a better plan than just the LiDAR data. Now, the other problem, the core technology, patented user interfaces. We're using all 3 buttons of the mouse. We don't have any commands. You don't have to squint your eyes. Prompts are intelligent. It will decipher what you meant to put in. We have the only alphographic prompting with video in the prompts in the entire computer industry. We own the patents on that and a whole lot more. Architects, surveyors, planners, and engineers don't communicate. How can you have a sustainable world when there's no collaboration? Consultants must collaborate. So while learning to use the software, we are teaching surveying, engineering, planning, merging architecture with landscaping so that the rooms actually have views. We teach financial modeling. So now architects, surveyors, planners, and engineers have a common knowledge base. When you integrate everything into a single core technology, you simplify it. For example, Microsoft Word's easy. Microsoft PowerPoint's easy. A lot of these office softwares are easy, but they still separate it. It would actually make it even easier if they just had one core technology. Hey, it does everything. We look at a new future. Disruption. No modules. We'll support the Microsoft headset. The virtual reality will then become affordable to everybody. We envision very soon Planning Commission members, council members, having a headset in front of them. There's no more question. You're going to be able to experience proposals, whether it be a shed in someone's backyard or a 1,000-lot subdivision. You're going to be able to experience it as if you were there. We're going to expand in the GIS industry and go head-to-head with the SRI. We'll have a much easier-to-use system. LiDAR is the worst thing that ever happened to contour line. If the industry doesn't change it by 2020, we'll probably look at ways that we can integrate some kind of realistic filtering. So making the land surveying profession important and exciting is critical, because once we do that, we make everything in land development important, exciting, communicative, incredibly easy to do. And that's why architects and planners can now learn the basics of engineering and surveying. And we can move this entire industry forward. And we don't have to have, in 2017, a plan that looks like it was made in 1900.